Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us here at the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce for another exciting online event. Today we'll be discussing a topic that's more than relevant to all of us in the post-COVID digital age. As all aspects of our lives become increasingly digitalized, we realize that we have more than just our heads in the cloud. In fact, I'm sure as anyone listening will know, it's very difficult to live in the way that we did over a century ago, and a lot of our data is also in the cloud. But with this new way of living, there are also dangers as well as the exciting new innovations which come with them. And the World Economic Forum Global Risks Report of 2022 labelled cybersecurity amongst the top and most rapidly growing global risk for the next 10 years for both industry stakeholders and non-industry stakeholders. In 2020, malware and ransom attacks grew by a staggering 358% and 435% respectively, making cybersecurity one of the top risks which were increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. While the issue of cybersecurity isn't new by any means, analysts think that cyber threats are growing at a pace faster than the ability of IT and cybersecurity professionals to understand and to solve. And because they're increasingly sophisticated and constantly evolving cyber attacks. 95% of these security breaches could be attributed to human error, which is why it's critical to have a very good understanding of cybersecurity and its many layers of variables, as we can no longer rely on our IT teams to support us without us ourselves making a great effort as well. Aside from having a good understanding of cybersecurity, good governance and corporate responsibility are also equally important. With the right best practices and agendas for the betterment of company ecosystems, employees and businesses can thrive. Within the Commonwealth, cybersecurity and corporate responsibility has always been a priority through the multi-stakeholder partnership called this Commonwealth Cyber Declaration, which replaced the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative during the 2018 CHOGM, that's the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. This is essentially a blueprint for cyberspace to protect the rights of individuals online and draft a collective of common understanding of good practices, which the Commonwealth Secretariat is working on to build in collaboration with Commonwealth nations. To contribute to this conversation and to help bring awareness on how to build a robust and efficient digital workspace with the correct best practices for management, as well as to make our lives easier by helping us understand better the complex nuances of cybersecurity, I'm really delighted to be joined by Jay Shaw, who's the CEO of Praxonomy, which he founded in 2017. Praxonomy is a UK-based technology company which aims to help and empower boards of directors by enabling them to become more efficient, effective and compliant with a powerful, accessible and innovative software solution that's easy to use and highly intuitive. Their SaaS, Software as a Service product, Board Logic, provides a centralized, highly secure platform for boards of directors to meet, engage and lead in the era of modern digital corporate governance. As the CEO of Praxonomy, Jay Shaw has more than 20 years' experience in the IT industry and experience on both corporate and non-profit boards. Jay co-founded and served as the CEO of Net Dimensions, a technology company that listed on the London Stock Exchange's AIM. Jay also chairs SANSIV, a Swiss technology company that helps clients better understand and respond to the voice of the customer. Jay is a member of the UK Institute of Directors and trains board directors on cybersecurity awareness for the Financial Times Non-Executive Director Programme. Jay, it's lovely to have you with us. I've known you, Jay, for many years. You're a serial entrepreneur, always innovative, always thinking of the next things to do, as well as successfully executing what you have on hand. You've listed a number of companies on the London Stock Exchange, and I'm very excited to catch up on all that you've been up to recently. So we can talk more about that later, but we're very happy now to listen to the presentation that you're going to give about cybersecurity and its importance for all of us and for businesses and for boards as well. So I'd just like to remind everyone that this webinar is roughly an hour long. We encourage all participants to chime in and send in their questions through the Q&A box, and I'm sure Jay will be happy to answer questions. So Jay, over to you for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Julia, and thank you to everybody who's listening. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope that this proves to be a useful hour out of your day. So I'm going to talk about a number of different issues, but all of them through three different filters. And these are perspectives, if you will, about areas of responsibility for business people. And the first will be personal. What is it that you need to do to protect yourself and to be a positively contributing member of your organization? The second is for the senior leadership team, management, and the third is for the company as a whole. So those are the three perspectives we'll be looking at. And to maybe add a little bit to what Julia just said, and I think everybody will be getting this presentation, and these are click-throughs you can look to. It's not a small problem. There's been no sudden outbreak of virtue in the world, and cybersecurity is simply one more category of risk, and it is growing fast and costing more and more money as time goes by. So it's worth your time, it's worth your effort to be on top of this as much as you possibly can, regardless of your background in technology. All right, what's changed? Julia said 2020 was a big year. And it was. That was also the first year that COVID really hit globally and brought changes. So those big growth numbers in cybersecurity incidents, 385%, and the other is more than 400%, really had a lot to do with the fact that people were working remotely, and there was a far expanded landscape of attack, if you will. And people were using their own devices. So it wasn't something locked down by corporate IT departments so much as it was, everybody brought whatever they had to the party. And some of that was very strong and some of it not so much. So it was a year of change, and it's created even more change going forward. So, and if I were to hazard a guess, I'd say we're never going back to pre-2020. Hybrid working conditions of one kind or another will be the norm going forward. So, what do you have to think about for this kind of thing? And there are kind of three main attack categories, if you will. One is your garden variety corporate and cyber espionage. So these are often work for hire people who will go after commercial trade secrets, who are looking to get ransomware payments, who are at work all the time, nibbling at the heels of every company that's not as buttoned up as possible. They're not the only people out there, though. There are also hacktivists, and this is a new and growing threat. So the loosely organized collective Anonymous has gone after government agencies and corporations and individuals. And these folks are generally extremely skilled and not in it for the money. They're in it to make a political point of one kind or another. And then the third attack vector to be very aware of is around state and near state actors. And these could be law enforcement or intelligence agencies of different countries. Could also be specialized operations that work with military or corporate involved agencies in different countries. They could be arm's length rather than direct. But these are the three big areas you need to be thinking about when you think about, what are the lions and bears out in the jungle? What do you have to be aware of? And we're going to go over just some of the ways that they use to take down corporate presence on the internet, or attack corporates directly one way or another. So a classic is a distributed denial of service attack. And the idea here is to bring down a company's ability to function on the internet. And that is often done by using networks of bots. These are computers whose owners have no idea that they've been used to send out 1 million requests to the target company, so much so that the target company's servers are overloaded and are just brought down completely. Malware is a general categorical term for all kinds of viruses, worms, harmful programs that hackers use to gain access to information and cause damage on corporate networks and individual servers. Ransomware is one type that's gotten a lot of press play, and that's where hackers get into a system and the ransomware actually encrypts all the data of the system, which means you're dead in the water as a corporate. You can't move forward at all. And then they demand money to reinstate, which they may or may not do after getting paid. So there's a big issue there. I just want to mention zero-day exploits. These are becoming more and more common. So most corporates rely on major technology companies for their software stacks and components. So think Microsoft, Oracle, SAP, to some extent Apple, a whole bunch of companies that you may not have heard of, but that are integral to the lower layers of the internet. And they're vulnerable to what are called zero-day exploits. These are vulnerabilities in their software programs that are present today and for which there is no security patch. And zero-day exploits are quite difficult to deal with until the security patches are released. The only thing that I'd recommend around this is that you make sure that your systems are always 100% up to date with versions of whatever software components you're using. But the big issue, and Julia mentioned this, is human error. So more than 95% of attacks on corporates and other agencies are caused or enabled by people making mistakes, people who in all good faith are trying to do the right thing and are tricked into releasing logon credentials or other information. And main types of that are phishing, spear phishing, and whaling. So phishing is when you get an email that looks legitimate, but is actually sending you to a server or an interface that's not what you think it is. And this could be man in the middle, it could be something else. But the point here is for the hackers to get your logon credentials as quickly as possible. Spear phishing is a kind of phishing that the hackers are not doing as a mass mail out. Instead, they do a bit of research on you. So they say, Carol, so great that you won the award last Tuesday at the industry event. We were there and support you 100%. We need you to do X, Y, and Z. Whaling is when a phishing hacker actually assumes the identity of one of your bosses. That's the typical way. And whaling can be extremely effective. Most people pay attention to what they think their bosses are asking them for. So Google actually put out a survey a while ago, just to see how many of its own employees could identify a phishing email from a real email from Google. And in fact, the pass rates were not very impressive. So sometime after that, Google decided to issue everybody security keys to stop that.
So, Jay, I'll just chip in because as a law firm in my own business, we've experienced all these kind of attacks, and some of them I think it's probably spear phishing, but they actually pose as clients asking us for fee quotes on things, and they set up fake email addresses with sort of plausible sounding titles at real companies. And the main way we can ever identify them is that they often send them to more than one person in the firm. So we know if we're getting these multiple requests in that way that this is probably what they are. But you know, we've on a couple of occasions we've wasted a lot of time trying to reply to these, and we still can't figure out what they really think they're going to get out of this. Anyway, just to mention, we encounter all of this.
Yeah. So the first thing they get is they've validated that their email addresses for your staff are correct. And that may seem like a small win, but for a hacker, that's a big win because they can use that information as a stepping stone to take other steps that may not directly involve the person whose email address they just got. So it's quite dangerous, even when there's not an obvious click here to get your documents delivered tomorrow kind of option hyperlink. So yeah, it's serious, and you're right to talk about it. The best way to prepare for this and guard against it is awareness. So talking amongst yourselves is step number one.
Yeah.
All right. I think everybody knows the costs at this point. There are direct financial costs, and some of those are business costs. Some of those are fines and penalties levied by state and national governments at this point. Some of them are consequential damages. You end up in court for years because you neglected to take proper care of one thing or another. Another cost is simply the hit to your reputation. Wow, if they can't keep their own house in order, how can we trust them to do X, Y, or Z for us? Regulatory and compliance violations, aside from fines and penalties, you know, lots of things can happen as a result of a regulator deciding that you as an organization have not taken due care against these risks. And that could come back and have effects in various ways, license permits, approvals, on and on. Okay. I think we get the point at this point. We get the point at this point. It's a real threat. It costs money. It causes real damage. It's something that you need to be paying attention to. If you're a board member or a senior executive, you have to be aware that you yourself are a target, and so is everyone you deal with at your level, up a bit and down a bit. So what you need to do is be thinking in terms of security being job number one. So you need to be secure by design in what you do, and your IT people can help you with that. Consultants can help you with that. Reading can help you with that. But you also need to be secure by default. So the default choice in every case should be a predisposition to the most secure option that you can deal with in a cost-effective way. So use encryption. Always encrypt your own hard drive. It's amazing how many people have laptops and don't bother to encrypt their hard drives. It's easy for Microsoft Windows users. It's easy for Apple Mac OS users. It's just a couple steps. You should do it. Use a VPN, a virtual private network service. That gets rid of a lot of the landscape for attack. Use a privacy-friendly web browser. And there's a lot more, but just those changes. If you're not currently using a VPN, you should be. If you're not currently encrypting everything you use on a regular basis. You should be. Okay. These are actually some screenshots from things on my laptop, the laptop I'm using right now. One is Padlock. It's a password manager. I used to create my own passwords. That stopped a long time ago. I don't know any of my passwords at this point. The system itself makes 15, 20, up to 30 character passwords for me. And I change them periodically. And actually, Padlock is just one of many services out there. They're all pretty good, and something is better than nothing, and now is better than later. But in fact, Padlock actually looks at the dark web, and it will screen everything you have on your system against what has been hacked on the dark web. So you can see which of your passwords and logon credentials in general are for sale right now. So that's pretty valuable. Two-factor authentication is a big thing. I use Authy. There are Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator. There are other ways to do this, but it generates OTP, one-time passwords. They last for 30 seconds. And it's not unlike an SMS to your phone as a second factor for authentication, but it's a bit more secure than that. One step further in many cases is to have a device. So this is YubiKey. They're the big American provider of devices. NitroKey is the big European one. They're in Berlin. They have excellent technology, and they also use near-field communications now, so you don't even have to put it into a USB slot. You can just hold it next to your computer or your phone, and the magic happens. But you should be using things like this if you possibly can. What are things to think about? If you're talking about secure browsers, Tor would be the most secure, and that's beyond the needs of many business people, but it is, if you are one of the law-abiding paranoid, it's the way to go. Other options would be Brave. That's very much a security-focused browser. Firefox, if you set it up to at least medium settings, DuckDuckGo for mobile especially. And these things are very useful. They're either free or near free, and they don't slow you down. So there's not a big convenience loss in changing. But just to give you a sense, Google supplies Chrome, and that's the most popular browser. Even if you clear your history from your Google Chrome browser, it will not clear any of your Google searches or your YouTube history. Google maintains those things, even though you think you've cleared your browser. You haven't. And you might say, well, that's not a big deal. It is a big deal if Google is hacked, or if Google gets a national security letter or other request to look at something that your organization in particular, or your sector, or your organizations in your country are doing, and they comply. Then all of those histories are now in other hands. And there's just no reason to give them that as an option, I think. There are a bunch of good VPN services the world over. I use Proton. It's excellent. It's Swiss. It's a not-for-profit. The guys who run Proton are all from CERN. They're PhDs who are smart as they can be. But they're not the only ones. Express is great. Nord is really good. Surfshark and CyberGhost are good. And there are others, but you should absolutely be on a VPN by default. In terms of email services, the days of yahoo.com as an email address should be gone. Hotmail as well. There are excellent high security email services that encrypt by default and design. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are good ones that are free or reasonably priced, depending what level you choose. And then in terms of messaging, you should probably stay away from things like WhatsApp. and instead use an end-to-end encrypted messaging service like Signal or Wire. Telegram is not always encrypted. You have to set it, and what happens in group Telegram spaces is a little different from what happens one-on-one. So you need to be a bit careful with that. But Signal and Wire are two great options. If you're curious, something like a third of all email address holders have been hacked. So if you're curious as to whether you've been hacked or not, here are 3 places to go. One is Firefox Monitor. It's the Mozilla group, the people who make the Firefox browser and a lot of other wonderful things. And it's just monitor.firefox.com. You put in your email address and they'll tell you immediately if your logon credentials are for sale. Have I Been Pawned does much the same thing. That was set up by an engineer at Microsoft, and it got so popular that Microsoft said, look, we'll just take it over for you. You don't have to keep working on this on the side. And then the last one is a German system, which is wonderful. Because there's a great deal of overlap, one of them will give you most of the information you could need, but they're not 100% overlap. So if you're really curious, you should look at all 3. And if you have been hacked, if your logon credentials are for sale on the web, you should go and change your passwords for everything immediately. Absolutely immediately. This is an ad, and it's actually from T-Mobile and Apple. And I'm not going to play the whole thing, but it's a good illustration of how laissez-faire people are about their own information. And it's also fun. So I thought I'd play it.
I've browsed 8 sites for divorce attorneys today.
I browsed 8 sites for divorce attorneys today.
My login for everything is Pauline@paulinefoo.com.
I love working with you.
Me too.
Red heart emoji.
Pink heart emoji.
Yellow heart emoji.
Blue heart emoji.
I hate Lee though.
Puke emoji.
Puke emoji.
I am currently reading an article titled 10 Ways to Keep Sweaty Hands from Holding You Back.
My home is in 1,000 feet.
My heart rate is currently 150, 151, 152, and back down to 150.
On March 15th at 9:16 a.m., I purchased prenatal vitamins and 4 pregnancy tests.
The number on my credit card is 0237-1221-0725.
It goes on, but I think that makes the point. An interesting illustration.
Hilarious, isn't it? I mean, honestly.
It really is. The Americans had, I think, 21, they called them FOBs, forward operating bases in Iraq at one point. And some of them were identified simply because the soldiers at the base used Fitbits to track their daily exercise. And it's a SaaS product you can get with Fitbit. That puts your daily exercise statistics on the web, and you can compare yourself to other people. And so somebody superimposed some of that data on maps and actually identified each one of the bases' location. They were secret bases, but they were all outed because of Fitbits. So it's amazing how useful seemingly innocuous personal information can be to those who have an interest in taking information like that. Okay. If we jump from you as a person to you as a member of a board or a senior leadership team, the data is unbelievably important. I mean, if you work for a big bank or another company in a market sector that's strategic one way or another, you are a target. You are a target by corporate espionage actors, you are targeted by hacktivists, and you are targeted by state actors. There's no arguing with that. In fact, one German agency did a review, I think last year, on data from the year before, so 2020, on German companies that had been hacked, and found out that 38% had been hacked within the year, and most of them had no idea. So that's a chilling statistic, actually. 38% of the companies surveyed had been hacked, and most of them had no idea. People live and die by email with attachments. This is not good for sensitive information. It's just not a smart way to share information around management teams. Mass market collaboration platforms are hit and miss. A Canadian government agency got into deep trouble not so long ago because they'd put a lot of confidential information up on their Slack platform, or Microsoft Teams, no, Slack platform. And one of their members unencrypted and deprivatized the doings. And so it became open to the world. And this happens all the time. So when you're looking at communication systems and data storage systems for senior management, you have to start by assuming your target. Just start with that.
I heard a story, Jay, I don't know if it's apocryphal, about some UK government department that used Trello boards to coordinate, and they forgot to make it private. So they made all this information on a public Trello board from a UK government department.
So that happens. And it's back to your earlier point about human error. So everything has to be secure by design, secure by default. And most mass collaboration platforms are neither. They're not secure by design. Security is an add-on option, and they're certainly not secure by default. So if it's the case that you're using some of those, you have to be extremely vigilant about what you do and how you check things on an ongoing basis. This is the part where we plug our own product. We make a board portal solution. It works for senior leadership teams and boards of directors, and it ticks the boxes for those security requirements. And it's worth taking a look at some kind of portal solution that's optimized for senior management, because they are secure by design and by default. Why does it matter? Again, using the filters we're talking about, there's kind of a group responsibility for security. There's an individual responsibility, and there's also a perspective around the administrators. I mean, Julia, you just said the Trello board thing was because somebody forgot to mark a project as private. Administrators should be able to have it private to begin with, if that makes sense, and be able to do their jobs easily. Okay. How do you know? How do you know whether you do Trello boards or Slack or Asana or Microsoft Teams or something optimized in a little different way? And one way to look is to make sure that it's third-party security certified. So is it ISO 27001 security audit certified? Table stakes would be GDPR compliant. Is it privacy certified by a group like VeriSafe, which would look not only at the company itself and its processes and its products, but also at its supply chain and its partner network to make sure that they're all clean? Are there periodic vulnerability tests done? Does the company actually, hire third-party hackers to come and kick the tires hard? Where is your data being hosted? Because different countries have very different rules. In some countries, every citizen is required to hand over data. Every citizen in every company is required to hand over data on request of any public security or other government organization. In other jurisdictions, they have to go to court. In some jurisdictions, it's secret courts. In some jurisdictions, it's open court. By far the most liberal, if you will, and I don't mean it politically, but I mean it in terms of care for individual data privacy, countries would be a list including Switzerland, Netherlands, Norway, Iceland, a few other countries. If your provider is hosted in one of those countries, it's probably doing things right, actually. And then there are some other things to be aware of. The best system in the world is useless if it's not easy to use. So it needs to be well designed in terms of the human interface. It needs to be obvious for you to get your work done. So that makes sense as well. So what can you do? Assume that you don't have a postgraduate degree in IT security issues, but you are responsible for your own company or for your own board or senior leadership team. One thing you can do is just ask a lot of simple, open-ended questions. So, for example, okay, IT department, you say we have backups. Have we ever tested them? Should we do a test? Next weekend, should we act as if our primary systems have been taken down? Let's see how long it takes to get the backup live and online. Things like that. What if scenarios are extremely useful? What would happen if we had a ransomware attack and they asked for an amount of money we could pay and our insurance looks like it would cover it? Should we pay? Should we bring in the law enforcement people instead, et cetera, et cetera. Keep practicing everything and don't get angry at your own people. Just everything is a learning opportunity. There's no such thing as complete security. Most companies that care about security aim for 5 nines. So it's not 99.999% secure. And that's considered gold, silver, and platinum standard if you can get there. But don't worry too much about the perfect getting in the way of progress, because wherever you are now, guaranteed you could do it better, and you should just start. I would recommend 2 really good books if you're interested in spending some time on this. One is by 2 gentlemen, Thomas Parenti and Jack Dome, who run a consulting business, and they consult for governments and corporations on cybersecurity issues and what senior managers should be doing. And they're often brought in after things have gone horribly wrong to make sure that things don't go horribly wrong a second or third time. And they've distilled 20, 30 years of practice into one easy to read book. It's great. Another is this is how they tell me the world ends, which is quite the title, but it's a New York Times reporter, Nicole Perlroth, and she's looked at security issues very deeply for years in her reporting, and she's great. She's really great, and it's a fantastic education reading this book. If you want to do something that's not as much of a commitment as a full book, we actually have some free things on our website, and you can click through from this presentation. One is called the Digital Hygiene Checklist for Boards, and it's a simple cheat sheet about things that senior leadership teams should be thinking about. The other one's a little bit funny, although it's deadly serious, and it's called Risky Business, the Dark Side of Email, Why Email is More Dangerous Than Ever for Boards. And it's true. It's extremely dangerous if you're just using unprotected emails. One thing that we recommend to clients, which puts us way out on the far edge of the line of security, is we recommend that senior leadership teams, certainly boards of directors, do not use the same systems their companies use. Let me say that again. Boards of directors and senior leadership teams should consider using separate systems. And as an example as to why this is important, when Maersk, the big shipping company, was attacked, they were down for 3 weeks. They were struggling. Well, how does your board communicate? How do your senior leaders get on top of things? If they're using systems that are also down, then that's a problem. So as a way to avoid that problem becoming a crisis, we say just don't use the same systems to begin with. Use other systems. That way you're insulated from attacks against your company and you can still function. Anything ISO does is worth taking a look at. ISO, the International Standards Organization, they have a lot on security. I mentioned 27001 security audit certifications before, but actually the 27,000 group is a whole series. And 27,000 itself is definitional. 27,002 is about best practices. There's more. It's worth taking a look at. So just to conclude, as Julia said at the very beginning, things are not getting better. They're getting worse. The stakes are getting higher. The attackers are getting ever more sophisticated. So there's no magic bullet. You just have to be on top of this. You have to think about your being on top of this in different ways. One, you personally, another, your senior leadership, and the third, the entire organization and its ecosystems. Don't think that you can just let the IT department deal with this or consultants deal with this. It's your responsibility to look at it and act. Because you are a target personally, the board is a target personally, and the company is also a target. So you need to be aware of those threat vectors and be actively questioning what your company's doing and contributing to making things better. And that's it. That's my presentation.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Jay. That's really great. Thank you. So it's wonderful to hear all of that. So interesting, but it's also terrifying. It's so terrifying and so ubiquitous in my personal life and my business life that I almost don't want to listen to this because I feel like a deer in the headlights. It's overwhelming. And I wonder if I should be like my stepfather, who's in his 90s, who barely goes online. But of course, that just doesn't exist in the modern world because we can't do business if that happens. So that it's quite terrifying. But one thing, as a lawyer, perhaps it's why I jump on it, but I'd like to discuss with you more. There's the area that, in fact, everything you've described is, I'd say 90% of it is relatively low-hanging fruit, as you've made clear. And I just wonder about the liability of boards for negligence and acting in the best interests of the company, certainly under Hong Kong law, where I am, under English law, and the laws of a lot of Commonwealth countries. There is a duty of care to the company and its shareholders and its stakeholders, often depending on the nature of the law. And if you don't even deal with all the low-hanging fruit and make sure that the company's data is protected, I think that might be a major negligence issue for a board. I'm not aware of any claims on that basis, but you could see that as being a big possible area of risk for boards in the future, as I can see you're emphasizing. But I just wonder if you could share your thoughts on that, particularly in the light of the services that you've worked on so much with your board portal. Because I think a lot of people might think, well, that sounds like a wonderful idea, but it sounds an awful lot less convenient than email. I can just open my email and read it. So can you comment on that and why your board portal is easy to use?
It's actually no harder than email. So it isn't more clicks or more steps. You can just get into it. And well-designed board portals have alert notifications, some of which might go through email. They won't have the content in the email, but the email will say, click here to log on to the board portal and read the news, whatever it is. To answer kind of the first set of questions you brought up about negligence and how that works, I think, and in talking to a lot of board members, they seem to think that if they have cyber insurance and they've relied on their own IT department or on periodic consulting audits, they've done enough. That's okay. We're not criminally negligent. We've done our duty. We've shown care. We're fine. I think that argument gets less and less strong over time because, as you said, the shots just keep coming. It's not slowing down. It's not a one and done thing at all. You have to be on this, if not day in, day out, at least board meeting in, board meeting out. You have to be thinking about risk in general and cybersecurity as a growing category in your risk portfolio, if you will. So it's not something you can give away to professional advisors. It's not something you can rely on staff to sort out for you. As a board, you have to be in there and asking the questions on a regular basis. And again, you don't need to have a PhD in computer science to do this. To say, well, look, explain how our backups work and how long would it take us to get back online if we do go down, is a reasonable question to ask. And it's equally reasonable to say, well, if you're telling me it's only 20 minutes, let's do it next Tuesday. Let's see if it takes 20 minutes. Guaranteed, for most companies, it won't take 20 minutes.
Yeah, but what I find is that when I speak to my IT people who are all busy and working hard, that it'd be like holding their feet to the fire to get them to do something like that. There'll be a million reasons why they don't want to do a test like that. It'll always be something that'll be kicked down the road. So I suppose there really needs to be a lot of impetus, I think, for boards to do that, probably far more than there is now, actually. Perhaps it should be much more of an audit issue, really, if we're looking, because there's so much done on a financial information in terms of audit, but not so much in this area.
I couldn't agree more. And all employees are busy. Everybody's going to have a reason not to do something. But if it's non-negotiable, if you say as a board, whether you do it through an external audit exercise or you do it internally, almost doesn't matter. But if you say, look, we're going to do this once or twice a year, we're going to test our systems. Let's make believe we got hit by a ransomware attack. That's the what if scenario we're going to look at for this quarter. How would we communicate and how would we get back on our feet? What would we do?
Yeah.
So those are not those are not nice to haves. They're must haves at this point. Yeah. As for your original point about what's negligence, I have no idea. I have no idea what a court would say or a regulator would say in which jurisdiction. But I do know from talking to people on both sides, on the organizational side and on the regulatory side, that the old truths no longer hold. They're not looking for passive acceptance of status quo answers. They're looking for active participation in ferreting out risk categories and trying to find reasonable responses to them.
Yeah. I totally can see that. So I remember that Net Dimensions had a lot of online training and it was very ahead of its time. That was one of the earlier companies you set up. So what brought you on the journey for Praxonomy to do this, really something which is quite cybersecurity related, in creating this secure board portal? Because I do remember from the outset, you were very keen on the security aspects of this.
So Net Dimensions dealt with clients in what we call broadly high consequence industries. So banks, insurance companies, engineering firms, airlines, clients in industries where either health and safety or a great deal of money or both were generally on the line. So we learned to think about security from more than a decade in that world, because when a plane goes down, the first thing the investigators do is pull the training records of the pilots and the mechanics, and they say, well, what happened to that plane and what were the capabilities and most recent training audits of the people involved. So they don't have patience for systems that can be canoodled. They want systems that are airtight. They want to know that what they're looking at really happened on the day it says, in the way it says. So that's where it was born. But we had a non-executive director on our board at that company, wonderful senior executive at Swire, who said to me at one point, Swire has a portal for board senior leadership teams. You're a software company, why don't you? And I thought, well, that's a fair question. So we looked at their solution and we decided it was a bit pricey for what was on offer. So we just built one, and we built a very simple one, not as a product to offer the world, but for our own use. And interestingly, that year, the audit partner at PwC came back to us and said, best board records we've ever audited. And I thought, really? It's not, we didn't do any magic. We just put 10 years of records up in a way that were easily searchable, and we're continuing to use them on an ongoing basis. And I thought there might be something to this. So after we sold Net Dimensions in 2017, I thought, let's do this. This would be a good company to do, and it's a real need, and it's a growing issue for everybody. So it's not quite as big a jump as you might think. There was a progression that made sense.
So is Praxonomy going to spin off at all and use your sort of portal expertise and software for things like deal data rooms and that type of thing that are used a lot?
So in our plans, we're looking at not only the board portal solution, but also a shareholder portal solution. So for AGMs and communications with shareholders outside of AGMs, and what's called the cap table solution, just taking care of who owns how many shares and how do they work, and what if scenarios for employee stock option plans and warrant offerings, and what if we took in some new investment? What would that look like? So that's the third product we have on our wish list of things to build. And then a virtual data room for the fourth product is on our list as well. So yeah,
that's quite a populated space, virtual data rooms. But I suppose if you have a particularly secure one, that's probably quite a good selling point.
Yeah, you're right. It's not greenfield. There are virtual data room offerings in major countries by some fairly large providers, but it's a little bit horses for courses. So the biggest one in the States tends to work with Fortune 500 companies on major transactions, M&A transactions for the most part. But there's very little in the space for small cap and medium cap listed companies that want to have that kind of capability without necessarily the price that you'd pay for a Fortune 500 company solution. So we think there is a go-to-market strategy that would make sense for that.
Yeah, I think so too. So here's a question somebody has sent in. To what extent is an Apple device or MacBook safer than an Android device or PC? I guess the other part I would add, and is it?
It used to be far safer. And the problem with Android is not the Android software per se, but the point that it's open source and providers who put it on their phones can do anything they want with it. So Samsung's Android is not the same thing as Xiaomi's Android, et cetera, et cetera. So it used to be that Apple was hands down more secure. And that was also because there were so few Apple products as a percentage of all products in the market that the hackers didn't waste their time on them. That's changed. So now Mac OS and Apple iPhone, iPad systems are considered serious targets, especially iPads, because board members and senior executives tend to like their iPads. So hackers go after them. So they're not definitionally protected. I use a Mac. I've used Linux laptop. I've used lots of Microsoft laptops. Now I use a Mac. But I have antivirus software on it. I use a VPN, and I encrypt whatever I can encrypt. And that's still not 100%. I mean, one of the interesting things about getting hacked is you won't necessarily know you've been hacked. And an outside consultant may not be able to tell you whether you've been hacked or not. Hackers are pretty good at their jobs.
So if hackers hack you and you don't know, what have they probably done with your data?
It depends. Maybe they were looking for something specific. Maybe, for example, if we're talking about board level data, maybe they want to see expansion plans in a certain country or a certain market sector. You just don't know until you get some real world feedback that makes you think, wait a second, that's not something we advertised. How did so-and-so get a hold of that information? So it happens all the time. There was a famous case some years ago, and it was written out by an author named Bamford. He wrote a book called The Puzzle Palace about the NSA, the National Security Administration. And there's a group called Five Eyes. It's kind of the Anglophone world intelligence services. And a German company was about to file a patent for something very strategic. And the Canadian member of Five Eyes actually got wind of what this German company was about to do, let the Americans know, who then told an American company it was about to happen, who then beat the German company to the patent office by a matter of hours. And this all came out in court cases later on. And in fact, they were all guilty of sin. Corporate espionage on the part of government intelligence agencies. And then everything was kind of thrown under the rug and money was paid and we never heard the details. But Bamford lays out what happened in some detail. So this happens all the time at all levels.
Gosh. And one thing I noticed was that on your list of secure messaging apps, there wasn't WhatsApp, but WhatsApp says they're encrypted. So what's going on there?
So WhatsApp was not encrypted until the former head made a deal with, I'm not making this up, Moxie Marlinspike. And that's the name of the brilliant programmer who created the Signal encryption protocol. And so WhatsApp licensed it and instituted it. It took them a while and they did it. However, Facebook, now Meta, bought WhatsApp. The folks who were in charge of WhatsApp quit. And in fact, one of them is now on the board of the Signal Foundation. And Meta is dreaming different dreams. So they very much want to know about messaging traffic. They very much want Instagram, Facebook Messenger, and WhatsApp to be able to share data so they can sell the data to advertisers. So I simply wouldn't trust it.
Right, interesting.
That's my personal opinion. I hope I don't get sued for saying that, but I wouldn't trust it.
Well, it's very widely used, WhatsApp. That's why I just thought I would ask you. Yeah. So you mentioned about these authentication techniques. I mean, one thing that roll back from that, also the data, the password storage. I mean, I use Dashlane. It's been life-changing for me to have it. But I do wonder, what if someone hacks your storage place? That's like a treasure trove, isn't it?
Then they have everything.
Yeah.
Then the question for you is it more likely that that'll get hacked, or that an individual and much used and abused password will get hacked in transit to a website that may not be as secure as it should be, one way or another? So you pick your poison in a way. Nothing is 100% guaranteed, but it's certainly far safer to have something on your device that you have a master password for. I assume you do, for Dashlane, and may also be looking at biometric identification for logon purposes, than it is for you to be using, Julia123 for 17 important.
Yeah, I certainly got cured of that by Dashlane. when they told me that some passwords similar to what you've just talked about had been compromised something like 64 times or something like that. They told me. Goodness, yeah. Yeah, and with the double authentication, I mean, that can be quite inconvenient. But do you think that you should use more than one phone to make that safer, or do you have any views on that?
So if you're using MFA, multi-factor authentication, or 2FA, that is far safer than simply password protection.
Yeah.
So studies have been done showing, good passwords will protect you more than 80% of the time if a hacker is coming after you. A good password plus some kind of 2FA, whether that be a 6-digit passcode through a device like Authy or Microsoft Authenticator, or a key, is generally more than 99% secure. So it's better. It's not 100%, but it's so much better that it's worth a bit of inconvenience, I think, for logon purposes. But they don't have to be inconvenient. You can set up some password managers as extensions to your browsers, and they just do it automatically for you, for example.
Yeah.
So that's possible. So you're not spending a lot of time. I actually don't use that because I think you then inherit all the vulnerabilities of the browser.
That's what I thought. Yes, yeah.
But again, pick your poison. It's better to do that than to do nothing.
Yeah. And what one last comment or question for me is, this seems a bit of an focused on area in terms of wills and people passing on as to what happens to all this digital data and how their families can manage their affairs, which is all going to be locked up when they depart. I don't think people focus on that very much, and perhaps it's partly because for them, obviously the demographic that's much more likely to be passing on is probably not the ones that at the moment are the major tech users, but that's increasingly going to change, and it must have changed a lot over the last 3 years already, I would have thought.
It's a bit of a nightmare, especially with blockchain and Bitcoin and other solutions where you're not, a court administrator can go to Google and say, open the records of so-and-so recently deceased. They can't really do that for blockchain applications. That's not a possibility. There's nobody to serve the court order on.
Yeah, and it's sort of like going back to the Middle Ages where you sort of buried some treasure in your garden. I mean, nobody's going to know where it is, isn't it?
I'll tell you what I do. I export all of my logon credentials. And I think the last time I checked, I had 177 sets of logon credentials. And because I work in software, that's not surprising. But I actually export them to a CSV file and like an Excel file, put them on a USB stick, and put the USB stick in the safety deposit box of my bank with a letter around it saying, in the event of my death or inability to function, this is everything I have and do. You can get access here. And that's not a crazy idea. Now, of course, HSBC might get broken into, but it's unlikely.
Yes, yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I don't think it's something that lawyers perhaps bring up enough when people are making wills and making arrangements and so on. Yeah. Great. Well, we could keep talking for quite a long time, Jay. It's already more than an hour. So thank you so much. It really was great. It was a masterclass in data privacy, although I'm sure there's an awful lot more you could be telling us, but perhaps we can catch up again in a few months' time and see what other developments there've been to try to make Commonwealth businesses and people in the Commonwealth safer and more secure, certainly from a digital point of view. So I wish everybody a great day or a great evening, depending on where in the world you are, and hope to see you again soon. Bye, Jay, and bye, everybody. Thank you.